Western and European societies, I think, are the result of the downsides of that experience of like, oh, like, why is there so many things where people are just sort of being exploited as a resource instead of being emotionally connected to? It's like, well, because in childhood they were exploited as a resource instead of being emotionally connected to. So they're just repeating the same thing and then building systems on that. Anyway, yes. All that to say, I'm a big believer in the theory of trauma affecting people later in life.
Well, one on that note, one of the models that I like to use that I find it's not necessary, it's more of a heuristic than a model, I guess, is if you look, if you're trying to look at society as a whole, it helps to imagine as if a culture were a single person, uh, and different phases in the culture are different phases of that person's life. So you tend to go through different. I mean, you could probably model this. I bet you could model this on the four turnings, or Strauss-Howe generational theory, which is damn, I always forget what these are. There's the golden age that comes from the hero generation. Then there's like the
I'm
like
unfamiliar with this model, so you might have to explain
okay,
it a
yeah,
little
okay.
more.
So basic, I mean the simple version is good times make weak men make hard times make strong men make good times.
That I
But
have
that's
heard
an
of.
oversimplified version. There's a larger one, which is the Strauss-Howe generational theory or the four turnings, depending on how you call it, where it's basically it's like 18 to 21 years plus or minus. You go through different periods of people, and there are four of them, and in between each of these four, the saeculum is what they're called, which is cycle in Latin, I think, or something to that extent. In between each of these four stage cycles, there is a crisis. So basically, you have the hero generation, which is the greatest generation. You have the boomers, who are the ingrates born of opulence, right? That don't appreciate anything. You have a generation that's disaffected, and then you have a generation that has to a hero, shitty, silent generation. Yeah, and then you have like kind of the generation that starts kind of realizing there's a problem. So in this case, the boomers start the bad cycle, and it's supposed to be. I think it's Gen Z is the hero generation for ours. We're
Yeah.
kind of the nomad generation. I
The
think we kind of
millennials and Gen
rebel.
X are the disaffected, like maybe
Mm,
younger millennials, and then Gen Z.
yeah, but Gen Z's they're the ones that are supposed to fix it, and you can kind of see this. Gen Z is very polarized because there are a lot of Gen Z people that are just like totally the worst, and then there are a lot of the Gen Zs that are like really weird, like weirdly concerned about these big scale social issues and stuff. In a way that is surprising because there are people in our generation that just aren't anywhere near that. Um, so at any rate, um, where's I going with that? Yeah, so you can imagine some of these different phases as the life of a person, and what are these phases? Okay, you it's the hero's journey, right? You gain a reward, you don't appreciate it, things start to stagnate, things start to go bad. You have to come to terms with the fact that you created a problem, you solve the problem, things go well, they fall apart, and it's just the way it goes, right? And there's a to that extent, there's a quote from a founding father. It's at maybe it's John Adams. One of the founding fathers has a quote that's to the extent of, "I study politics and war, so my sons can study poetry and philosophy," or something.
Yeah, it's John Adams. He
Right,
basically says I study politics and war and all of those things so that my children can study business, so that my grandchildren can study art and literature and poetry and
right,
things
right.
like that.
And
I'm probably getting the
in
specifics of the
that
quote wrong,
vein,
but
it's
that's the
ironic
gist.
because yeah, that's all we need. That mentality, ironically, is the mentality that causes the problems because it's always the art generation that doesn't help fix the problems. Unfortunately, art's very important though, so I don't want to say that as a way to like carelessly demean art.
Well,
But
my dad wrote about the same thing. There's a theory of cycles of generational wealth, which follows much the same pattern, which is that one generation is the entrepreneurs that builds the wealth. There's a second generation that expands the business that usually like they follow in their parents' footsteps in that business. The third generation It's often about creating art of some kind. So it's art, experiences, social change. And then the fourth generation, it's often about experiences. So that generation tends to be things like ski instructor, yoga instructor, things where the job they're doing is fun for them in some way. And what he said is that no matter the level of wealth in the family, it follows that. And my family follows it too. Like, I'm the artist generation. And for me, it's like I had the advantage of, like, my parents were professionals, so there was some level of stability. And so it's like, well, if I don't have to take care of the basic stability, I want to do something that contributes to the world in a more meaningful way. And then, of course, if my kids have meaning, then it's like, well, why don't we do something that's going to be really like a really amazing experience in our life with that? But of course, then
That
if
makes
they're
sense.
just having great experiences, they may not be throwing all of their time into building a business. And then the fourth generation comes along and so, or we're back to the first generation who's like, well, we have a great life, but we don't have a lot of money. So let's change that, start a business.
There's some irony in that because it kind of shows that no matter what you thought your goals were, there's somebody, your child is going to be dissatisfied by it in some way, right? And thus,
Or is it just an evolution like seasons? Like, I don't know. There's 4 seasons too, right?
yeah. Well, and I think it's necessary too. I just find it funny. There's an interesting version of that. If you look at the Buddha, right? So before the Buddha is born, his father is this great king, and a mystic comes to him, or a sage or a guru or whatever, holy man of some sort, comes to him and says, "Hey, your son is either going to be the best king in the world, or he's going to be a renunciate, right?" And so the father, after he's born, he doesn't let him see any old people or sick people or feel any suffering or anything. And then it's like his 18th birthday or something. They're having a parade, and they're like going down the street, and he sees out of the corner of his eye, there's some old person who he's never seen before. He's like, "What the fuck is that?" So he hops off the thing, runs out to the river Ganges where they're burning the bodies and they're hiding all the lepers here and stuff. And he's like, "Oh shit." And then he renounces the world, right?
Mm.
And so it's interesting because had he not done that, had he not tried to hide all the suffering from him, he probably would have just done his job. He would have been a normal person. But because of the immense trauma that comes with 18 years of never seeing suffering and then becoming cognizant of all the suffering in the world, you then realize, oh, no, this is the only thing that I care about because now I understand, right? And so that's like, well, can you imagine what you think as a result of that? Like, what else don't I know? You're going to now question everything, right? Oh, if they're suffering, then who else must be suffering? You're going to think about the suffering of the world. So if you want a recipe for making a Buddha, that's probably it.
Thank you for listening to the Brendon Marotta Show. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone else who would also like it, and then go on whatever platform you listen to the show on and leave a positive review. If you want to support the show directly, go to brendonmarotta.com/show and subscribe there. Paid subscribers get special unreleased bonus material and live events that are only available to them. Once again, that is brendonmarotta.com/show. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you all later.